Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Yamunatira Vanachari Yamuna Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, good evening. Do you mind moving this to the side so it's not interrupting? Yeah. You're observing one lengthy Ekadashi. I'm just joking. Do we have a copy of the 5th canto? First few chapters. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Krishna. Could you also move this away? Yeah. Creative impetus. So tonight we have for discussion the Srimad Bhagavat Purana, 5th canto or 5th skanda. And we will cover chapter 3. Then tomorrow chapter 4 in the morning, and in the evening chapter 5. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So the 5th canto is entitled Creative Impetus. And the chapter 3 is entitled Rishabhadev's Appearance in the Womb of Meru Devi, the wife of King Nabhi. So instead of, I was told to give a chapter summary, so that's what I shall do. I will tell you the story. So Rishabhadev, King Rishabhadev, very famous king in the long line of Vedic kings, had a son whose name was Bharata. And Bharata was so popular that even nowadays India is known as Bharatavarsha, because of Rishabhadev's son, Bharat. Now Rishabhadev's father was King Nabhi. And tonight we shall take a quick look into how Rishabhadev came to be the son of King Nabhi. And the interesting thing is that Lord Rishabhadev was not just an ordinary human being, but it was literally incarnation of Krishna. Incarnation of God Himself. So the story quickly goes, and this is a typical story, you find it everywhere. You find it in Mahabharata, you find it in Ramayana. This is a very typical situation where a king would like to have a son. Now why did kings like to have sons? The Vedic kings, yes.
They could become the next generation of kings.
Very good. So, and very often they like to have many sons. Why did they like to have many sons?
But they are more
The
kings.
eldest son used to be the king.
But why did they want to have many sons as opposed to just a few?
Maybe because they could compete to see who gets king.
One father.
No. That's sort of American American technology, American social technology. Americans, you don't hear actually Americans say that a lot, but it used to be a big pride of America, competition. But I think Americans are also now becoming slowly tired of competing all the time. And they would say if there's big competition, then people produce better products. But now even Americans are getting tired of this hyper-materialism. But that's a good thought. There's some logic to it, but unfortunately incorrect answer. Okay, that's a good one, but there's one more reason that's above that one. Yes.
So there can be more kings?
That's also true, but not quite. You're right, but there's more to it. Yes, yes, of course. That's what the kings do. They live for Dharma and they died for Dharma. Yes, but for that, one son would be enough. Well,
why so many?
Yes.
To expand their power?
That's also there too. That's smart. And because they fought a lot. They fought a lot, and so sometimes they would die. And they would, the whole family would remain sonless. And son was to inherit the kingdom and carry on not only the kingdom, but carry on the tradition, carry the service, the dynasty, etc., etc. Okay, so very often these kings considered a good son a great blessing. And not just some kind of vague blessing, but a blessing of God. That literally Krishna, Narayan, Vishnu, whatever the concept of God was, they would consider God's blessing if they obtain a good son. So for that reason, before actually they would even attempt to have a son, they would engage in a ritual, 2 yagyas, for the pleasure of God, to provoke God's blessings. So King Nabi did the same thing. He wanted to have a great son. And so what he did, he employed what kings used to do. He employed Brahmins to perform a yagya. And I'm going to quickly tell the story and then we'll go to details. So the story goes, he employed all these Brahmanas. The Brahmanas, the priests, performed the yagya. Vishnu appeared. They offered some prayers to Vishnu. Vishnu was very pleased with their prayers. By the way, king did not offer prayers, just the Brahmins offered prayers. Vishnu was very pleased, and he said, and he gave his blessings that that the king will get the son that he asked for. Now, seems like a very uneventful story. But if you look into details, there's much going on there. So, first of all, here we have, we could say, a remarkable attitude by the king, because he hired Brahmins to do the yagya and employed pure Brahmins. Now, nowadays people actually don't always understand what a pure Brahmin is. But Brahmin is one who knows Brahman and one who has Brahminical qualities. Such, excuse me? Correct. To know Brahman means to, how do you know Brahman? Through the Vedas, of course. Brahmins had to have qualities which people nowadays don't know. They just think if someone looks like a Brahmin and his father's a Brahmin, then he must be a Brahmin. He might be a Brahmin, but I was in Hollywood, in Los Angeles. We'll leave time for questions later. I was in Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles with a group of maybe 30 devotees. And in the street we were singing the names of God, names of Krishna. And as we passed through the street, there was one person who was sitting on a little chair, and in front of him was a cardboard box. and he was selling this cheap jewelry, that plastic jewelry that has no value. And he was from India. And so when we passed by, he was yelling, "I'm a Brahmin, I'm a Brahmin." And he showed his Brahminical thread. So, of course, he might be Brahmin by birth, but not by his deeds. So Brahmin has to be Brahmin by deeds and by qualities. So King Nabhi, he employed pure Brahmins, means that they were pure character. One of the important qualities of a Brahmana, that the Brahmana speaks truth. That Brahmin is very truthful, will never tell a lie. And so we'll see later on that was important in this story. So they performed this yagya, and remarkable, Vishnu actually appeared in this yagya, which means if we, for example, go back to the first canto of the Bhagavatam, there is a story of Narada Muni. And Narada Muni, in order to, well, I guess I'll skip that part. But Narada Muni told the story of his own life and how as a child he had audience of Krishna himself. Actually, I think Vishnu appeared to him, if we were to be very specific. And when Vishnu appeared to him, then just moments after appearing before him, he disappeared. And no matter what Narada Muni did, Vishnu did not reappear. And then, because Narada was very disturbed now that he has had experience of Vishnu, and then Vishnu wasn't there anymore, he was very disturbed. Then Vishnu, he could hear Vishnu. Vishnu just spoke to him. And he told him one thing, of course. He said that I appeared to you for just a few moments so that your desire for me could increase. But more specifically, relevant to tonight's discussion, Vishnu told him, those who are not completely pure in heart cannot have my audience. So the fact that these priests performed yagya and Vishnu appeared there means that these people really were pure. There was serious purity to these priests. And so when Vishnu appeared, they offered prayers, which is the etiquette in the presence of any great person, let alone God himself. That before we say anything else, we should offer some stuti, some glorification, some praise, and which actually in English, if we say prayer, means you're usually begging for something. My obeisances to Harivilas Prabhuji. In English, if you say prayer, usually people think you're referring to begging or asking something from God. But actually in the Vedic tradition, prayer means stuti, means to glorify God. So they glorified these priests, being cultured, of course. They first glorified Vishnu. And they said several things that should be of interest to us. One thing he said that to Vishnu, he says that that those who don't know, they think that the yagya, that the sacrifice, is performed for God's pleasure. But it isn't. It is performed for the benefit of the performer. So one who performs yagya actually benefits. In other words, what they were saying is, here we are, we're doing this yagya, and most people think we're somehow or other pleasing God, we're giving to God something from which God will somehow or other derive some pleasure or benefit. But this is not so. The only person who derives benefit is the person who sacrifices themselves. Because God, if you look in other Vedic statements, nothing exists out of God. Everything exists within God. So there's nothing that we own that God does not have that we can offer to God. So Krishna has everything. There's nothing. Even if we offer something to Krishna, we're already offering that which is His. Something similar like At least in America, parents do this. On a Mother's Day, for example, father will give child money to go buy some gift for the mom. But child has no money of its own. So similarly, when we do offering, we have nothing of our own to actually offer. Because even these bodies are not quite ours. These bodies are composed of elements that are also belonging to God. And so the only one who benefits is actually the one who performs the sacrifice. And what is the benefit? What is the benefit of sacrifice? We shall come to know in few moments. Then the next thing the priest said, they were apologizing. They were apologizing to Vishnu. They felt a little bit embarrassed. Why did they feel embarrassed? Because they did all this elaborate yagya to invite Vishnu and then to ask him what? Please give a son to the king. And they were a little bit ashamed of this. Actually, they were ashamed a lot. Why were they ashamed? You know that? No. Okay. They were ashamed because people who actually knows things, they don't ask anything of God. Those who know how things really are, they do not ask anything of God. And so what they said is, please forgive us for disturbing you for these puny things we're doing here, such as asking for a son. In other words, those who really understand what is going on, they don't ask anything of God. In other words, those who do ask, they don't quite know everything. And we shall come to explain what that means also. Srila Prabhupada, when commenting on this verse, he says that one who is a true devotee of God, that such a person asks only one thing of God. And this is opportunity to actually be of some service, which is actually another form of sacrifice. Nadanam, najanam, na sundarim, kavitam va jagadisha kama, etc., etc. Prabhupada quoted this verse by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that I do not want anything from God. I don't want followers, beautiful women, fame, money, none of it. I just want one thing from God, and this is the opportunity to be His bhakta, to be a devotee of Krishna. They sort of felt that they offended Vishnu by inviting him to such an insignificant sacrifice. Now, why did they consider this sacrifice insignificant? Obviously, it was a big sacrifice. It was a big, elaborate sacrifice, but it was insignificant because of the purpose of the sacrifice, which is also an important thing. What does this tell us? So here we have this big, huge sacrifice. Big sacrifice. A lot of Brahmins doing it, very elaborate, comprehensive, and yet they consider it puny. They consider it insignificant sacrifice. This means that the greatness of an activity is not defined by the activity, necessarily activity itself. In other words, when we do something for God or in our spiritual lives, just the fact that we have done that thing does not quite define the value of our offering. But what does define the value of our offering? It is the purpose for which we're doing that. So here we have these Brahmins doing a huge ceremony, huge yagya, huge sacrifice. But it is considered puny because the reason for which they were performing the yagya was tiny. Had they performed this yagya for pure bhakti, not wanting anything from God, then this yagya would have been considered great. And even if it was a small thing, even had they sat at home and did a little yagya, small yagya, just one Brahmin, let's say, That would have been greater yajna than hundreds of Brahmins in a big arena and thousands of people attending and huge offerings into the fire and very elaborate, etc., etc. So it is not exactly the elaboration of the, what's the English word, ritual. It is not exactly the elaboration of ritual that makes ritual great. But it is the reason, the purpose for which the ritual is performed. And so also in our lives, of course, if we're truly devoted to Krishna, we will offer to Krishna all the best and as much as we can of everything. But nevertheless, we also have to understand that simply by offering a lot of anything does not make that offering great. What makes offering great is the reason, the purpose for which we're making the offering. So if we're making an offering out of pure devotion, not wanting any material things in return, then such a yajna, such a sacrifice, such a ceremony, such an offering, such an activity is considered great. So they felt like just like a dignitary, if you have a big dignitary, let's say that the President of the United States of America comes here and then you invite the President of the United States of America into, I don't know, some very small event. You invite him to please come speak, and then no one shows up there, maybe one person. Very small, insignificant event. And you invited big person to an insignificant event. So it would be inappropriate. So that's how these Brahmins felt. Otherwise this was a big event, huge event. But they felt it was a small event because the reason for which they were performing this was not right, was not quite pure. And so therefore they felt like they a little bit offended Vishnu. And Brahmins, so in their stutis, they're saying all of this in their prayers to glorification of Vishnu. Ultimately, they said, ultimately the benefit lies in what? The benefit lies in always remembering you. They're speaking to Vishnu right now, to God. Ultimately, benefit lies in always remembering you. And so this was also, this is throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, repeated lesson. Some or other we think that the benefit lies in getting something out of God. You go to God and you squeeze few things out of God. Oh, very nice, I got my apartment or something. But the real benefit, real blessing is actually to remember God. Yeah, I'll say that later on when we elaborate upon it. Then they said, unless one remembers God, now they're speaking to Vishnu, saying, unless one remembers you and unless one serves you, one cannot overcome several things. One cannot overcome the illusion, and one is therefore forced to continue to take birth and die and take birth and die continuously in the material world. Which means you never come to the end of the material problems. And so, therefore, to remember Vishnu and to serve Vishnu is actually true benefit. Now, when commenting upon this, Srila Prabhupada said, we could... I think I'll skip that for the sake of time, but I'll just move on. When commenting on this, Srila Prabhupada said that to surrender, to actually worship Krishna, Vishnu, God, to surrender to Him means something very specific. And I would ask, but it's too vague, so you probably never guess. Or maybe you will. Let's see if anyone guesses. Surrendering to God involves what?
Getting rid of all sins of all past. But
That is very true. That is very true. But I'm looking for a very specific spin that Srila Prabhupada gave on this topic. Yes?
getting rid of Bhav Sagar.
Those are all results. But before we get the results, there is a way in which one actually surrenders to Vishnu. To specifically here we talk about Vishnu, but no difference, Krishna, Vishnu, Ram. Prabhupada said that to surrender to Krishna means to surrender to... No. To surrender to a devotee, to Guru. This is very important. We'll see now. To surrender to God means to surrender to a devotee. And this is stated in many places throughout Shastra. Basically, what Srila Prabhupada said is that unless one gives oneself to the guidance of another devotee, a saintly person, then one actually is not really surrendering to God. And Krishna also said this, that one who claims to be my devotee is not my devotee. But one who devotes to a devotee of my devotee is my true bhakta. So that's a little detail there to be remembered. And when they finished their stutis, Vishnu was very pleased. Even though everything they said was true, but still Vishnu was very pleased. Because even they asked for son for the king. King didn't speak, which actually goes to show the humility of the king. This is also sometimes when you, if you talk to your guru through another devotee, that's a sign of humility. It's an expression of humility also. So the king did not speak directly to Vishnu, but he had Brahmins speak on his behalf. This was an expression of his humility. And Vishnu said that he was very pleased. So even though Brahmins gave all these reasons, this is Brahmins who are not telling lies, so whatever they said is true. So it is true, the sacrifice, the yajna was puny, was not very important because of the reason, it was somewhat impure, but still Vishnu appeared, and now Vishnu says that he is pleased. And why is he pleased? Now this is very important. Why is Vishnu pleased here? He is pleased because their sacrifice and because their prayers were honest and sincere. Now this tells us several things. This tells us, number one, that Krishna is an emotionally... Hare Krishna. That God is an emotionally healthy person. That God is not a monster. Because the way some people would picture God, you would think looks more like a monster than the best of all personalities. Because one of the Sanskrit names for Krishna is Purusha Uttama, the best of all people, the best of all personalities. But the way some people describe God, you would think it's a monster, that He's a monster. For example, some people think if they transgress etiquette or some ritual somewhere, a little bit somewhere, then, oh, I transgressed the ritual, now I'm going to hell. But what kind of person would send another person to hell for transgression of a ritual? Therefore, in the same way, simply by performing a ritual perfectly does not necessitate Krishna's blessings or pleasure. So what we find here is that Vishnu, even though even though they had material desires, especially the king had material desires, and they engaged in this sacrifice. What for? To get a son. So they wanted something from God. And still, Vishnu was so nice that he understood, okay, you are like that, and that is, I understand. You have this great material need, and even though it's not completely pure, it's not completely right, but you're honest. You're honest, you do want to become pure devotee, but you cannot just do it right now. After all, every journey is a journey. I just came from Portland and it took more than 3 hours. There's no way you can come from Portland to Seattle in an instant. Maybe if you're God. Otherwise, it takes some time. So similarly, in our spiritual lives, we cannot achieve perfection, or we cannot become pure devotees, as they say, overnight. It's a journey, and it takes some time. And so, these devotees here, they were honest about it. They were honest. They were honest first in the sense that their goal of life was pure bhakti. But before achieving the level of pure bhakti, they understood that they had material desires that they could not avoid. And those were the desires they had to please. And having expressed that to Vishnu, Vishnu did not say, "Oh, you rascals, get out. He didn't say that. He actually understood. You're very honest. And that was the thing that he appreciated. So God himself appreciated the fact that they were honest. And of course some people would abuse this. They'll say, yes, I'm honest, but they're not. In other words, the goal of life is not to become a pure devotee. And in the meanwhile, they're very happy being materialists. Maybe big materialists or small materialists, but materialists. But these people, their goal of life was pure bhakti. However, they were not, specifically the king, not quite pure at this point. And they were honest about it. And so therefore Vishnu was pleased. And he was so pleased that he was actually going to give them what they asked for. So in other words, if our material conditioning is demanding, if our material conditioning dictates that we're so disturbed that we cannot exist without certain material things, then God will give that, if you're honest. Because that will move you forward closer to God. Another thing that we ought to aspire for pure devotion. But if there are these things along the way that come in the way and they're disturbing, then actually, if we're honest about it, Krishna will help. That is the message here. And then finally, Vishnu addressed their concerns, their prayer, their plea, their begging, which was them asking for a son for the king. And now the king, yes, he wanted a son, but he also wanted the best son. He wanted his son to be just like Vishnu. And so Vishnu said, well, that's impossible. No one's like me. It's only me who am like me. Which is another thing to be noted carefully. Because in the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna says that Mata parataram na anyat kinchid asti. No one's equal or superior to me. There's no rival to God. There's no one equal or superior to God. This is definition of God. And so he said, therefore, I will become your son. He was telling to the king. And Meru Devi, King Nabi's wife, she heard that because she was there too. By the way, if you If you're married, this is in Vedic tradition, if a husband performs a religious, spiritual function, then the wife should also participate. Sapatni. I think in English they say, how does it go? People sort of joke, but there's so much truth to it that a husband and wife who pray together stay together, something like that. Of course, this is probably more relevant to Americans. Don't quite have the culture of commitment to marriage relationship. Okay, and so the chapter ends there, and then in the next chapter, finally, Rishabhadev is born to the king and the queen. But now, I'll take a few minutes just to look at this phenomena called yagya, because as I went through this story, I referred to several things. For example, the benefits of yagya, and I said I would say, what are the benefits of yagya, the remembrance of Vishnu, etc., etc. So we will cover that in a few minutes. Now, yagya or sacrifice is a central theme of Vedic culture and Vedic knowledge, Vedic attitude, Vedic civilization. It is so important that, for example, you'll find in the Bhagavatam description of people performing all kinds of wonderful and all kinds of literally crazy sacrifices. Even to the point, we find, for example, in the later cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam, people sacrificing people. So, but sacrifice is constant. It is going on throughout Vedic culture. As a matter of fact, we could say that this is the bread and butter of Vedic civilization. Yagya. And what is this yagya? And why is it so central to this civilization? As a matter of fact, we'll see, according to the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, that yagya is not only central to Vedic civilization, but it's central to every being, specifically human being. We'll come to that in a second. Okay, so in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes what this yagya is. And so he begins by first saying that we have to understand that this world, the physical creation, even though it's a very interesting place, but this interesting place does one thing which we actually do not want. So what we're doing, we're approaching this world, we're interacting with this world, but this interaction with this world is producing that which we actually do not want. And so when our power of analysis is shallow, we only perceive short-term results and therefore fail to see long-term results of our activities, and thus we fail to perceive the nature of our activities. And so one thing that our interaction with this world produces is bondage. And it's a bondage in varieties of ways. First of all, generally it binds the soul to the physical creation, so that the soul has to continuously take birth and die and take birth and get a job and lose a job and marry and die and have children and all over again and again and again and again and again, and there's no end to it. Also, it binds one, this is described in the same chapter, it binds one to the very thing that causes one pain. This is called attachment. And of course, I will give a very gross example, just because exaggerations tend to illustrate the point more strongly. For example, someone who's addicted to consumption of alcohol or drugs. That person gets some pleasure out of it, but then by becoming attached to that little bit of pleasure, one is forced to continue to perform that activity The very activity that's ruining that person's life and giving so much pain to that person. But same thing goes on for other things which we may not perceive always as pain. Just a side note, you may like it or may not, but I'm just repeating what the Shastra says. Krishna in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, this very same book, it says, I do not know of a greater pain than the pain that's produced, that comes when one endeavors for sex life. Of course, this may go over the heads of a lot of people, but for example, just a quickie pointer. Srila Prabhupada said that Srila Prabhupada on a number of occasions made a correlation between economic development and sex life. He said if there was no sexual attraction, there would be no endeavor for economic development. And just think, what is economic development? Who in the world needs economic development? Only people who are disturbed. It's pure suffering. There's nothing but suffering in economic development. In the idea of economic development. Why? Because everything's already there. You grow some food like people traditionally lived in pre-industrial times. You grow some food, you eat that food, you produce some cotton or whatever, make some clothes, keep a cow, have some milk, build a little place, house that you can live in, and that's all you need. But people who are disturbed, they create civilizations such as the modern civilization in which people are constantly competing for economic development, where everyone is constantly disturbed. Let alone all other... Where do the wars come? Like people say, religion creates war. It's not religion. It's just people who want to control other people and very specifically their natural resources. So this very same thing, and it all sprouts from the sexual urge. So those who get over the sexual urge, they lose interest in this so-called economic development. So the interaction with this world tends to bind one to this world. And yajna is the thing that frees one from this world, from the entanglement in this world. That is the process of yajna. As a matter of fact, Krishna stresses in the Bhagavad Gita, he says that, quote, without sacrifice, or yajna, one can never live happily on this planet or in this life, and what to speak of next. So Krishna is really emphasizing the importance of yajna or sacrifice. And then Krishna says something very interesting. He says, Saha yajna praja srishtva, purvacha prajapati, etc., etc. He says that the yajna or sacrifice is built in us. That yajna is built in every single one of us. And if you think about your life, you will see that you always have to sacrifice. You sacrifice for the sake of children. You sacrifice, if you think of sacrifice as an attempt to please someone who's superior, that is done on regular basis. Societies, groups of people always recognize great people and offer them some kind of homage and recognition. These are all different forms of sacrifice. In other words, sacrifice is unavoidable. It is built in us. So the idea of sacrifice or yajna in and of itself is not enough to free one from this world, but it's a beginning of a civilized life. It's a beginning of a civilized life. So generally, well, okay, here's a quote from one devotee. I was just reading something he wrote on this topic. And he said, quote, ability to feel gratitude and to reciprocate lifts us above abject savagery. So ability to feel gratitude and to reciprocate elevates one above abject savagery. Why is he saying this? Because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives this picture. Krishna analyzes this world for Arjuna, and he tells him that most people in this world are here to grab, possess, and enjoy this world. Even though this world was here before them and will be here after them. But somehow or other they appear in this world and they think that this world has no owner and it's here, it is up for grabs. So people who are here to grab this world, they're called materialists. And so therefore, this is literally savagery. This is literally savagery. And some people go about this savagery in a little more civilized ways, and some are just altar savages. In the sense that they go and they, by brute force, take possessions of other people away from them. By brute force. This is absolute savagery. But a bit of a more civilized savagery is to just take by... I guess legal means these days, without recognizing that actually this world has existed before us. Just one example, and it really, personally, it upsets me. Every year I witness that. I spend about 4 to 5 months. My home base is San Diego. So in San Diego every year they have this big celebration where they celebrate Mother Earth, Earth Day Festival. And it draws God knows how many people. It's just a lot of people. And during this festival they always have very similar line, which is don't destroy environment because destroying environment destroys us. Okay, this is really bad. This is very selfish. In other words, it is not about the environment, it is about you. Don't destroy environment because it destroys you. But actually from one who is God conscious, from one who is respectful, for one who understands the nature of selfishness and selflessness, for one who understands the nature of sacred. Such person would not think like that. Such person would say, I do not destroy environment because of the environment itself. Not because if I destroy environment, I will destroy myself. This is just this is selfishness. So, in this way, in this world, most people are selfish like this. And therefore, in Vedic culture, Krishna explains to Arjuna, first, there are sacrifices. Why sacrifices? To civilize people, so they're not mere savages. This is something that parents regularly do. First, when the child is born, the child is almost like an animal. It simply takes. There's no asking, may I? That's just a child. It's just like a biological machine. But one thing that parents ought to do to the child is to civilize the child. So that the child learns that if I take something, actually before I take I should ask, and when I receive something I should say thank you. I remember my mother so many times slapping me. Say thank you? You didn't say thank you? Say thank you. If you have received something and if you don't feel urge, if you don't feel gratitude, then you're not civilized. And so one of the things that parents do is they civilize their children. So similarly, God civilizes His own children, us. And just as this civilizing process takes place on our plane, it also takes place universally. Here we come to this world and we grab things, we take things, or things are given to us. And if we don't feel some kind of gratitude, then we're literally confined within a small, tiny, our own personal universe. But if we understand that there is so much more outside of our own universe, by performing yagyas, these sacrifices, by offering tokens of gratitude, then we're immediately pulled out of our own little tiny universe and we become a part of a way greater reality. So many people in modern America feel miserable and lonely. Of course, because they live selfish lives. If you don't live a selfish life, you literally experience yourself as an element of a greater reality. You don't feel unimportant, you don't feel neglected, you don't feel confined into a small corner, but no, you enjoy a position in an awesome, literally awesome means great, reality. And so this is what happens when one performs yagya. Now, it is important to understand, as I said earlier, that not all yagyas free one from bondage to the material world. And so therefore there are different types of yagyas. Like for example, there are these religious fanatics who cry, very God conscious. Before killing, they say God is great. And while killing, they continue shouting God is great. So they're very God conscious, but they don't strike me quite as saints. So similarly, not that any yagya actually frees one from the bondage to this material world. So therefore, Krishna, while speaking to Arjuna, defines yagyas into two types. First type is a type for worldly minded people, for people who are in this world for the sake of this world. They're interested in this material world. Their aspiration is not to rejoin God in the spiritual world. Their aspiration is to find happiness and hopefully permanent happiness in the material world. They're simply making plans for terrestrial existence. And such people perform, then Krishna breaks these into three categories, which is the yagyas in the darkness, the disturbed yagyas, and the dark yagyas. The bright yagyas. So this corresponds to the three modes of the material nature, the goodness, the passion, and the ignorance. And so, for example, yagyas performed in the darkness of ignorance are performed for evil reasons, such as torture of themselves and torture of other beings. And they usually not performed, these sacrifices are not offered to God. They're not even offered to gods, like demigods. They're rather offered to dark creatures. And then we have people who perform what I translate as disturbed yagyas, because their minds are disturbed by the mode of rajas, or the mode of passion. And so they perform yagyas so they could get things of this world. They want to ascend, they want to become powerful, they want to enjoy social position, etc., etc. They're seeking some kind of power on the material plane. And they also do not worship God. Neither do they make these offerings to God, neither to the demigods. They offer these usually to what do you call them? Gandharvas and these kind of creatures. And then we have the bright mode. The bright mode, these offerings are made to, what does Krishna say? Demigods. Not God, but demigods. such as Ganesh, Durga, Shiva, like that. And you see this everywhere. People who want, they understand, they're at least civilized. This is actually, in some ways we could argue, this is where true yajna or sacrifice actually begins. Where you at least feel some kind of gratitude, some kind of obligation that you should respect these beings, and therefore you make offerings. But all of these offerings do not free one from this world. And so they do not really serve the ultimate purpose of yajna. Thus far, people at least become civilized. So they're not, as it was stated here, practicing abject savagery. But they're rather becoming civilized. Now, ultimately, there is yajna which is performed for transcendental reasons. Transcendental means, trans means above, comes from a Latin word. Means above this world. It is for people whose goal of life is not this world, who are not planning for this world, but are actually planning for God's world, for spiritual world, who are planning to leave this world and go back to Krishna, to once for all finish all these issues down here. And only these kind of people worship God, which means, just the last detail, that whoever else makes offerings, yajnas, to God for material reasons, they actually do not understand who God is, what their relationship is, and they're simply relating to God as yet another powerful being within this world, who's meant to help one, I guess, possess matter within this material world and help him realize their temporary material goals. So, I shall end there, and if there are any questions or comments, this would be a good time for that. Yes? For King Nabi, no priests, no names were given. Just the name of the king is given and the name of his wife, Meru Devi. Okay, thank you. Krantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. What was it? Oh, no off button. Yeah. I noticed. Oh. They know there's lecture every evening, right? Yeah. I'm not here to self-promote. They should come not because of me, but because of the class. Yeah. I know people like to do that, but I don't.
yogas.